Hey, buddy, your dog just got run over by a car. Let me tell you why that's good news. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and repeating from our election night special report, LOL, that we talked about last night. When you try to spin something positively, you run into the danger of being the guy that I just mentioned. You know, hey, your car just ran over your dog. Here's why that's good news. But I'm going to tell you what I think the positives of the election were last night, and I don't think we have to go into that territory. And I want to get Steve and Scott's opinion on this, on the big blue ripple that swept the nation. I think that the Democrats taking the House by the numbers that they took it in was a sub-average result of what was the embodiment of rage and determination for the last 2 years. So I want to talk about how things look where they look actually better than they did before the election. Better. So, Scotty, let's start with you. We had a Steve Green's episode of Right Angle this week is about a postmortem on the Republican majority that we lost in the House. And basically the response to that is not much of a difference, really. We should have legislated like there was no tomorrow. We didn't, and so now we don't get any new legislation. But let's talk about the court, because the court is the lever that the left has always had. Is their actual hard power. There's soft powers all throughout media and news and movies and so on, but their actual hard power was the ability to convince 5 lawyers that their greater truth was more important than the actual truth. And so rather than convincing 150 million Americans, or rather than convincing 435 representatives and 100 senators, if they could find 5 lawyers who they could get to agree with them, then they could basically run the country any way they want to. This is why there's progressivism. This is why the country's coming apart, because of the Supreme Court. Now, many people, myself included, I'm ashamed to say, thought that losing the House meant it would be more difficult for us to get Supreme Court justices appointed. And I found out, due to your remarkable knowledge of the system, that losing the House ain't got nothing to do with that, and that we are, in fact, much more likely to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Rush Limbaugh than we were before the election. Much more likely. Why is that?
You know, going to me on a question of such weight and import, for some reason just conjured the phrase, the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. I don't know. It's beyond me why you would ask me such a question, but I think there are, and let me just touch on one little sunshine thing, not to be too Pollyanna about it, but it will be kind of refreshing to see President Trump attacking Democrats for a while.
That's another question I got coming up.
So that's, I'm sorry, I won't go into that.
No, it's okay.
No, I think that the most substantive, long-lasting impact of any presidential administration is the judges that he or she is able to nominate and get confirmed to the federal bench. We only see the most high profile of them, so we're all aware of the Kavanaugh hearings. We know that Neil Gorsuch is there, but there are innumerable other judges on the federal bench across the country as a result of the work of many decades, frankly, of conservatives who have tried to cultivate people who read the Constitution as it is, and who have then tried to move those people into positions where they could be appointed to the courts or elected to the courts, depending on what kind of court you're talking about. And so the argument could be made, and frankly it was, back during the primaries when I was an opponent of President Trump's. I thought, well, if the guy actually did pick these justices from the short list that came from the Federalist Society or National Review or both, that would have been worth all the rest. I'll take that if I can get that, because as Bill so shrewdly points out, the Democrats' main lever of power is the courts. Now, interestingly, the framers would probably smile that little Mona Lisa smile if they saw the outcome of yesterday's election. And here's what I mean by that. The reason for the Senate was to be, in effect, a restraint upon the House. The House was seen as a more democratic legislative body, the lower house, so to speak. And the upper house of the Senate was meant to put the restraint on people who were being swept up by charismatic figures to be able to turn our country into something it was never intended to be. And so this setup is actually pretty ideal. You've got representation of the Democratic faction in the House. You've got representation of the Republican Federalist faction in the Senate that will be able to stop the House from doing anything that would be of long-term detriment. It could be better, but it could be a lot worse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know, I want to redirect something here on that, because the whole structure of the government, the genius of the government, was in play last night. And what I mean by that is just having kind of the startling realization when you look at the House races and you say, how many seats are up for re-election here? All of them.
435.
Yep.
All of them. Every 2 years we get to flush the system. Every 2 years we get to flush the system. But, and that's wonderful, and that's a quick turnaround for when you've got a really nasty Congress, but at the same time, you've got a group of people in there who are more resistant to popular delusions and the madness of crowds. And it is a damn amazing system. But Scotty, the point I'm trying to make is this. We watched Flake Week with bloody fingernails, counting the wobblers and reading the tea leaves about how one or two people are going to decide whether or not Kavanaugh is appointed to the court, whether or not character assassination, rule of law, due process, whether all of these things are going to live or die. And we were hanging by a thread there. We are not hanging by such a thin thread anymore, are we?
And the great thing about this is, you know how this is, how it must be behind the scenes. This means that with a greater majority in the Senate, a couple of senators can come to Mitch McConnell and go, hey man, on this one, I need a ticket. Can you give me a ticket? Essentially, here's your permission slip. You can go ahead and oppose this one because we have the votes. The worst position you ever want to be in is a situation where one senator can effectively be like one Supreme Court justice, can decide the future. Where it comes down to one, and then that person, Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins or whatever, becomes the most powerful person in the country for a day or so. So this is great. This allows, this keeps people from holding the Senate hostage. They will have to actually collude and conspire in order to do that now.
And one of those cushions that we picked up, one of those flake-resistant, 3 or 4 additional people. I don't know if we know what the number is yet in terms of what the Senate game was.
It's at least 3. It may be as high as 5.
At least 3. So that's 3 flakes that we can afford to have that we couldn't afford to have earlier, and we're going to need them, because if you think the way they fought against Kavanaugh to replace it was Kennedy, right? You wait till you see what happens when RGB decides that it's time to go home and bake cookies. There's going to be blood on the floor. But this is my point, and this is something I didn't understand, folks. Our ability to put Supreme Court justices on the bench who are conservatives is much stronger now than it was before the election, and that to me is the ultimate major outcome of this. Now let's talk about a couple of the other outcomes of why this is actually good news that we. I'm not trying to say that it's good news that we lost the House. That's your dog got run over and here's why it's great argument. I'm not saying that. It would have been much better to keep the House, much better. But let's talk about the reality of what's going forward. Scotty used a term that I like an awful lot, Steve. He said these people needed to stop the train, and they didn't stop the train. They locked the throttle on the train. The train is not going to go any faster, but it's not going to go any slower either. They're not going to pass legislation increasing taxes, and they're not going to be able to remove Donald Trump from office, Steve. They might go through the kabuki of impeaching him and smearing his name, and not that it needs any more smearing from these people. I think that may backfire on them too. But what happened last night, Steve, is that Donald Trump is going to remain president until 2020. Brett Kavanaugh is going to remain on the Supreme Court. The economy is going to continue to grow at 3 or 4% a year. The military is going to get the funding that it wanted. It's not going to take reductions anyway, let's put it that way. And Donald Trump, as commander-in-chief, may have lost his wall last night. That wall wasn't being built anyway that I could see. Nope. And he still is commander-in-chief of the U.S. military forces. And all of these things are really, really big gains against which the loss of a pretty rhino-y House of Representatives in the first place does not strike me as such a bad trade.
It really isn't. As I said, it would have been better to keep the house. But hey, I want to talk about my friend Sarah Hoyt, one of my dearest friends in the world, science fiction author, and she worries. She was raised in Portugal in the bad old days of the 70s, you know, when the communists and the fascists were fighting it out in the streets and people would get disappeared at night and all the rest. And she got so nervous on election night 2016 when things started looking good for Trump. She's like me, anybody but Hillary, right? And so when things started looking good for Trump, she and her husband Dan got so nervous that they drove down from Denver to hang out with my family. We all drank too much and watched the returns come, and we had a great time. She got really nervous last night. She posted a thing on Instapundit saying that, oh no, this is the worst thing ever, losing the House. Donald is a deal maker, and he's going to make a deal with Nancy Pelosi, and it's going to crash the economy, and he's going to get kicked out in 2020 because of it. And I think no. And Sarah's right to worry, because a coalition requires, I think, every kind of brain to make a successful political coalition. And you need the worriers, you need the diehards, you need the true believers. You need them all. But let me tell you why I don't think that's a worry. What I think happens is you look at this Democratic lineup of committee chairs and all the rest and what their ambitions are. They're going to have to fight their members for or against on impeachment. Who knows where that's going to go. Subpoenas, taxes, Mueller, all of this stuff. The Democrats are going to have to please their base, and that means letting some of their crazy out, the crazy that they did a pretty good job of keeping hidden during this election cycle. And if you remember, Harry Truman, when the Republicans took control of Congress in 1946, he ran against what he called the do-nothing Republican Congress in 1948, and he swept the Democrats back into power, including himself. Donald Trump, starting right about now, is going to be running against the do-crazy Congress. And I don't think he's looking to make a deal with Nancy Pelosi. I don't think he's looking to cut paperwork with Elijah Cummings or Maxine Waters. I think he's right back where he likes to be, and that's in the thick of the fight. So maybe Sarah has it right. Maybe I have it right. We'll see. But I'm feeling pretty good about this idea of mine of running against the do-crazy Congress.
I like it too. So, folks, here's why the fact that your dog got run over by a car last night is actually very good news.
Dude, I love my
having
dog.
Stop saying that. The thing that the one thing that could have happened last night didn't happen. There was a potential for a catastrophe last night, and every single progressive in the country had been working for that catastrophe, for us, for that. They were working for the victory, the blue wave that was going to do two things. Well, several things. But the blue wave was supposed to win the House and the Senate, and if that had happened, Donald Trump would not only be impeached, he would be actually voted out of office. He would have had 2 years as president, 2 years and some months or something. And that would have been a catastrophe. Mike Pence, of course, would step up into the position, and Mike Pence is a solid guy, and Mike Pence would have been solid on all the issues, but Mike Pence is not a knife fighter with these people, and so just the fact that they removed Donald Trump from office would have been an enormous moral victory for them. Not just a moral victory, it would have been an enormous victory. That didn't happen. Donald Trump's president until 2020, and instead of 1 year or a year and a half of 4% economic growth, when the numbers come up next time, it's going to be 3.5 years of economic growth. So that in itself is the reason why last night was a win. The ability to get a conservative in the place of these arch liberals is actually much stronger now than it was. In fact, I don't want to say it's foolproof, because as I mentioned last night during our election night special report, LOL, one of the things I love to do during a close football game, once we're up by one touchdown, is to stand up and say, God himself could not deprive us of this victory. But really, that's really it. We are now in a situation where if Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as an example, decides to spend more time at home with the grandkids, the bloodbath reaction of the left is their ability to stop Donald Trump replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Rush Limbaugh or Ted Cruz is actually much weaker than it was with Kavanaugh, and that is the single most important thing that happened last night. Donald Trump's going to stay president. Kavanaugh's going to stay on the bench. This is all good. Now, the question is losing the House an actual benefit for us? And here's how you could make the argument that it is. If the House of Representatives was so weak that they could not overturn Obamacare, was so weak that they couldn't vote for the wall, they were so weak that they couldn't do the things that the Democratic Congress did in 2008, which was legislate themselves into Obamacare and run. If they weren't really to help Donald Trump, willing to help Donald Trump, and were an anchor around what his agenda of recovery was, then having a Republican House of Representatives doesn't help us at all. Actually kind of hurts us. It means that every time we're going to criticize these people, it's friendly fire and so on. And I think the thing that I'm most interested in going forward is we have never seen Donald Trump able to attack Democrats about something meaningful. They are going to present Scott blanched at the word, but I'm becoming more fond of it every time I think of it. The next Speaker of the House is going to be this pickled mummy who is having difficulty completing sentences. This is going to be the face of the progressive movement. And this is going to be the voice calling for higher taxes and the voice calling for open immigration and the voice calling for all of those things. I think Donald Trump is going to have finally a target worth shooting at. And since I don't see how a rhino house helped us that much, I think we're much better off than we were at this time yesterday morning as we record this. So your dog got run over. We didn't get the house, and I think it's actually a benefit. So for those of you out there who are feeling disappointed by the results of this, there is nothing to feel disappointed about. There was an artillery shell coming our way that could have absolutely blown the train off the tracks, and it didn't happen. It wasn't fired. Since things were in motion our way before this election, losing the House means that we tied. And since things are going in our direction, a tie is a win. That's how I look at it. And it's a big win. So onward. It's got to be heartbreaking for so many Americans who voted Democrat. It's got to just be heartbreaking for them as time goes on in the weeks and months to follow. That they're continuing heartbreak as they wake up to the fact that, yes, we are still going to have 4% economic growth. Yes, there is going to be record unemployment for blacks and Hispanics. And
high.
Unemployment.
Yeah, record low unemployment.
Record low unemployment. Record employment for Hispanics and blacks is the worst thing that could happen to the Democrats. That blacks and Hispanics and everyone else are going to have jobs, and they're going to start having paychecks, and they're going to start being in control of their own lives. It's a catastrophe for the Democrats, and that's all going to happen. And Cheeto Hitler is going to be president for another 2 years, and I think that after 3.5 years of economic growth, the chance of him being reelected is much stronger than it would have been after having 1.5 years of economic growth, which is what would have happened if we had lost the House and the Senate and all the rest of it. So, tie's a win. We took the win. I'm going home with it. It reminds me of that classic headline, and I hate to butcher it because I can't remember it, but let's just say, I think it was an Army-Navy game, or maybe it was a Harvard-Yale game. Let's just say it was a Harvard-Yale game. One of these enormous inter-school rivalries, and the headline in the Harvard newspaper was Harvard defeats Yale 40-40, and I think that's exactly how I'm looking at it. So I'm glad this thing is behind us. The earth-shattering kaboom that could have happened didn't happen. And if you look at the final map of the election, if that's what the big blue wave amounts to, then I go, I fart in your general direction, and your father was a hamster and your mother was an elderberry. So there we go. We should be celebrating. We should be dancing in the streets, folks. The Make America Great Again train is continuing at the same speed, and the ability to put a constitutional loving justice or 2 or 3 or 4 on a court and render the country bound by law for decades and decades actually improved last night. And if that's not a win, then I don't know what a win looks like. So that'll do it for this edition of Right Angle, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Very small number of people make this possible. Check out the new website at BillWhittle.com and tell us what you think. We'd love to have you as a member. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.